Start today by acknowledging that it is Trans Day of Remembrance today, and this year confronts the sobering milestone of 5,000 documented murders since the start of the Trans Murder Monitoring Project in 2009. These are just the murders that we know of trans people globally, and 309 of those violent deaths were this year alone. This does not include suicides either, brought on by fear and discrimination. This is just murders. Many deaths and murders go unacknowledged as families misgender them in death, and sometimes don't even pursue murder charges due to embarrassment over the murdered loved one's trans identity. I myself almost joined these statistics in 2011, right here in Swift Current. So this issue is of particular importance to me and my family. And it was only in 2017 that hate crimes against trans people became federally acknowledged as such. So we have more work to do as a culture, as a country, to prevent these murders and suicides, and to properly remember trans people in death, as well as treat them with dignity in life. Just wanted to acknowledge that that's today.
Excuse me, do you mind telling us what happened?
For me, you mean? Yeah, it was essentially just some other high school students at the time got a bit inspired by what we were learning about the Holocaust. And, I was walking home one day and got bashed. It was, really scary, it's been a lot of years now, so, I have dealt with it, but I still think about it a lot when I do this sort of work. It puts sort of a personal stake in it, and I think it's important for people to hear about it happening in Swift Current, because a lot of this stuff feels far away. It's like I list off, 309 murders globally, and people think, oh, well, that must be somewhere else. And it's like, no, like 3 of them were in Canada this year, and, one, in 2011 almost happened in Swift Current. So, these issues are everywhere, including here, right? Does that sort of cover it? Okay.
I'm sure, sorry.
Yeah, no, it is what it is. I'm a board member now for Southwest Saskatchewan Pride, and a bit of a nerd about queer history, obsessed over it for part of my university studies in Halifax, and I've been collecting local history and materials for the Canadian Lesbian and Gay Archives in Toronto for a few years now. So that's sort of what I'll be pulling from today, is interviews that I've done with local people involved in these organizations, and all these photos are sort of what we have so far. I'm gonna sort of say at the end too, but we are looking for more photos. So if you have photos from any sort of Pride event that has ever happened, or just an event that you think is relevant, let me know. We would love to have them for our archives. And I also want to say I've avoided naming names throughout this talk for a variety of reasons. Some people I talked to in my research did not want to be outed or identified publicly. Others were telling me about the work of other people who they didn't know if they would be okay with being outed or identified. And many things would be attributed to the work of many people. So I would be listing different configurations of names with every date. I've anonymized it for the purposes of this talk, but in the archival research, it does have names. So these people aren't being forgotten to time. I don't feel comfortable outing anyone, so. And then this is also not everything that has ever happened in Saskatchewan, in Canada, in the world. This is just the stuff that I've selected to talk about today. Yeah. And then I also want to get sort of on the same page by what do we mean by pride? So pride refers to the community formed by people who identify as sexually, relationship, or gender diverse. These diversities include lesbians and gays, two-spirit people, transgender, transsexual, and non-binary people, asexual and aromantic people, intersex people, and many more identities, some which have existed in some form for centuries, others that have yet to be described. All of these identities are simply descriptions of experience. It's not really about labeling people to sort anything out. It's about identifying shared experiences so that we can communicate better. And we also have our cisgender and straight or heterosexual allies, which are important labels too, because without those words, people use words with not so good connotations like normal people or regular people. So it's always good to keep those words in mind when you're trying to describe yourself, if those feel like they're accurate for you. Okay, but why pride? The term pride in this context was coined in 1971. It was a response to the Catholic Church's negative stance on homosexuality, making a reference to their 7 deadly sins, and the way that the use of the word pride had already changed. So originally it was a word that primarily meant boastful, stubborn, and condescending, but became more commonly known to mean, to feel joy or satisfaction in one's accomplishments or character. So it became a word meaning the opposite of shame. So due to the historic systemic shaming of gender and sexually diverse people, pride offered a positive alternative to that word. It was an affirmation, a goal for people to strive toward, right? So for much of this talk, pride refers to the organization Southwest Saskatchewan Pride, but sometimes I'll also use it to refer to the wider 2S LGBTQIA plus community. I'll try to be clear about context so you know which I'm talking about. But if you get confused, let me know. I don't mind clarifying anything throughout. So on Turtle Island, also known as the Americas, prior to colonization, there were hundreds of different indigenous communities with their own concepts and languages to describe gender and sexual diversity. Many indigenous cultures saw who we might today describe as being gay or transgender people as being very important contributors to ceremony, as being connectors between and beyond genders. And one of the many cruelties brought in through colonialism was discrimination against gender and sexually diverse people. In the destruction of culture, many pieces of language, important figures, stories, teachings, and concepts were lost or destroyed. So as indigenous communities came together for healing, the term Two-Spirit was coined in 1990 to describe these special roles in ceremony specifically. It's sometimes understood that it's a label for anyone who is indigenous and gender or sexually diverse, but that's kind of a point of controversy because it was intended for this ceremonial role primarily, similar to an elder or a knowledge keeper. But that's not for me to say. People identify how they identify. So identifying as Two-Spirit is exclusive to pan-Indigenous communities, but it's more of an umbrella term as well, as individual languages and individual people all have their own words for how they describe their experiences, right? And that part is not exclusive to Indigenous communities. People have all sorts of words that they come up with to describe how they feel, who they are, and change that language over time. It's just sort of a human nature thing. And this also doesn't mean Indigenous people don't or can't identify with terms like gay. Many also identify with indigiqueer, an identity term that is used globally by people who see their indigeneity and queerness as inextricably linked. It's important to recognize the ways in which colonization is directly tied to the discrimination that I'll be talking about. Most of the history stuff that I will be talking about is based on legal changes. And we have to keep in mind that those legal changes operate within a colonial system. They were created as part of colonization. So, keeping that in mind with everything that we learned today as, part of the whole cluster of discrimination involved is quite important. And it's important to recognize, too, how colonial ideals continue to drive and inform anti-queer discrimination globally. I actually don't talk about it specifically, but one Canadian invention called the fruit machine was a test that was used to determine who might be gay. In serving in the Canadian Armed Forces or public service. This was, because queer people were considered at risk for blackmail, that they could be communists. So they came up with this system where you would stare at this screen with certain images, and a machine would track your pupil dilation. And based on that, it was determined whether you were gay or not. Now, we stopped using the fruit machine, a few years ago, but it was exported to other countries where it is still being used for the purposes of, killing people, ultimately. Countries that have laws where capital punishment is the end result, use our creation to determine who lives and who dies. So it's not just, that it hurt a whole bunch of people here. It is actively still hurting people globally. But okay, there's no way I can talk about much national or international queer history and still have time to talk about local history. But I'm going to touch on a few moments, primarily legal breakthroughs, as I said, that had sort of major effects in Saskatchewan. So in 1969, Canada decriminalized same-sex sexual activity between consenting adults. It kept who was a consenting adult at a different age than it was for straight people for another 20 years after that. But it was still, quite a breakthrough and hard fought for. In 1992, it became legal in Canada for gender and sexually diverse people to serve in the Canadian Armed Forces. As I say, this was after the fruit machine and after what was with the fruit machine referred to as the queer purge from the Canadian Armed Forces and Public Services. They're actually building a monument in Ottawa right now to people who survived that purge and had their lives quite upended. So I would definitely encourage you to look more into that if that's of interest. In 1995, the Supreme Court of Canada held that sexual orientation specifically is constitutionally protected under the Equality Clause of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And then it wasn't until 2004 that same-sex marriage became legal in Saskatchewan. And while that seems like, oh my God, only that recently, at the time, we were the 7th province and only the 10th jurisdiction in the world to legalize it. And then it wasn't until 2005 that the Civil Marriage Act came into effect federally, making it legal across Canada. 2004 was also the year that hate speech against gays, lesbians, and bisexuals became prohibited federally. So, as I said, that happened, and then it was another, 15 years until that was also acknowledged for trans people. In 2011, it became legal for same-sex couples to adopt children. A thing that you probably take for granted, that you would have that option, but again, it wasn't until 2011 that same-sex couples were allowed to. And I believe that it was an additional 5 years before a gay, lesbian, or bisexual individual could adopt. So if you had been a couple, that was one thing. But if you were single and wanting to adopt, that was still considered threatening for a few years. In 2014, this is more of an international thing, but certain anti-gay legislation in Russia ahead of the Olympics fueled a Canadian nationwide campaign against homophobia. So this was like a really big cultural moment for a lot of people. Our own Brad Wall, who, despite never attending the Pride events he was invited to, agreed to fly the Pride flag over Sask legislature and even penned a letter of support at this time. And it felt like a turning point for a lot of people that, most people in Canada were finally on the same page, at least about gay, lesbian, and bisexual rights. Because again, that was 2014. It wasn't until 2017 that gender identity and expression became grounds for federal protection from discrimination. In 2022, Canada made the use or promotion of conversion therapy illegal nationwide for minors and adults, which we were the third country to do so. I believe only 5 have adopted that total. And this was also the year that bans were considered lifted on queer people donating blood or plasma. There was still some debate about whether some of their screening questions were considered a bit restrictive still, but at least those restrictive questions apply to everyone, and you can point to, the ban has been lifted if you are feeling targeted while trying to donate blood or plasma. And then in April 2024, the ban on gay men and other queer folks donating semen was lifted. And this announcement faced a lot of backlash from folks who still believe disproven ideas like gayness being hereditary and HIV being a gays-only disease. So those are some of the wider Canada moments. And then I'm going to get into some more local. So in October 1996, the Southwest Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual Support and Social Group is formed. They advertised in 2 newspapers, and other than that, I don't know anything else about them. I have been trying to track down information on, who these people were, what their goals were, what was accomplished at that time, what meetings looked like. I have found no information. So if any of you afterward happen to have a lead for me, I would love to hear it. And then at some point between then and 2011, a chapter of PFLAG, which is Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, which is an international organization that has been running since 1973, was opened in Swift Current. It started as a phone line, advertised in the local newspapers before having in-person meetings at Maverick School. It was primarily a support group for gender and sexually diverse people and their families, a space to meet and confide. It was also a space where the idea of a public pride event in Swift Current was sort of first discussed. In 2012, after several documented generations of students fighting to start gay-straight alliances and queer peer support groups at their schools, a public Rainbow Alliance was started. It took place outside of the jurisdiction of schools. So even though at the time it was illegal to refuse a student asking to start a GSA. Local schools were using some little loopholes, like lying and saying that there were no teachers who were willing to facilitate such a group. So we went with our own little loophole and started meeting at the R.C. Dahl Center in the conference room. It only had to run for a couple of years before other schools in town sort of got on board. The pressure of there being a student group outside of the schools was stressful for the schools. They wanted to make sure that students were being observed by teachers, not by anyone else. So that put a bit more pressure on the schools to get on board with creating these support groups. Maverick opened one, 2012. Fairview, Irwin, and the Comp all started their own groups, and several communities around Swift Current also started them. I believe Maple Creek and Herbert were some of the first ones. I don't know if they are still running. I have not been able to find contact for that either. In June 2013, the first public Pride event was held at the Lyric Theatre. It was primarily an educational event with Erin Beckwell as the keynote speaker. She's from Cabri and is one half of the first same-sex couple to be married in Saskatchewan back in 2004. And you'll see one of the photos, a very blurry selfie. That is Erin taking a selfie from the stage of that event. I don't know if any of you remember the Golden Globes selfie or the Oscars selfie or whatever it was. This was right after that. So, she was sort of playing to the times, taking a selfie from the stage. But yeah, it's very blurry, but charming, I think. The night also featured two local bands who both had gender or sexually diverse musicians. There was a lot of fear surrounding this event in the build-up to it. It was only advertised by word of mouth, and hired security was discussed. Ultimately, they decided to take the risk, though they did have, volunteers who sort of watched the doors, front and back, for that matter. But the event went off without incident, and in fact was a great success. People were thrilled with it. People stayed afterward and had a little bit of a dance party. And it sort of set in motion the option to have events like this in the future. So the following year, people were asking, what's going to happen for Pride Day this year? So they invited Don Cochran to speak for another panel. He was from the U of S, and a really great speaker. The local PFLAG chapter folded in 2015 after the Sask Ministry of Education released a document titled Deepening the Discussion, Gender and Sexual Diversity, which essentially outlined how teachers could answer certain questions from students. And it was felt at that point that since there was a reference for teachers to use in schools, that an external support group wasn't necessary anymore. I have to emphasize how much of an optimistic period this was for people. They were really feeling like the cultural mindset had changed significantly, and that things like a parent support group, we don't need that. The students have supportive teachers and friends, and there's the It Gets Better project on YouTube. It was a really optimistic sort of moment. But as I will get into, we've taken some steps back since. Shortly after that, some of the organizers from the previous Pride events decided it was time to form an official organization and not-for-profit. So as a nod to the unknown historical ads and to mandate service outside of Swift Current, it was called Southwest Saskatchewan Pride. This group then put on events in 2015, and the first one to have a drag show was 2015, and it was still mostly word of mouth advertisement. People were still sort of scared about putting it out there that there was a community in Swift Current for this. But it was a packed house even then. A fact that remains with just about every event that we do at the Lyric still. So next time you see an event coming up from us there, get your tickets early. And then it also saw the first event outside of the usual Pride season, a coffee and board games night at the Newcomers Welcome Center. And that event would be repeated over future years as well, and sort of set an interest in board games that is still very strong within that Pride Center. As it can be more effective for preventing organizer burnout. But there was also debate afterward about where the incorporation took place, being a private residence outside of town. Some were concerned about the accessibility of the meeting. But incorporation would mean more opportunities to receive funding for events and programming. So most of the organizers agreed to go ahead with the plan. 2017 was also the year of the first Pride flag raising in Swift Current. It was the first real Pride week with events every day, including a barbecue and vendors at Market Square, with over 1,000 people attending. People traveled from across the province for that event. It was quite big. And it was also the birth of the Rainbow Crosswalk that year. So Rainbow Crosswalks had started to become sort of an international trend, and Southwest Saskatchewan Pride was an early partaker. In fact, our Rainbow Crosswalk was the first civic-approved permanent Rainbow Crosswalk in all of Saskatchewan. The Lieutenant Governor at the time attended and officially opened the crosswalk, and a number of prominent people spoke at the unveiling. All of this made the news nationally because it was such a sign of hope to so many people that, unfortunately, Saskatchewan did not have a progressive reputation where gender and sexual diversity is concerned. To say the least. And the last time Swift Current specifically had been in the news was for the rat incident. So it was great for public morale to have something featured about us that was positive. Now, I know there is and was a lot in Swift to be proud of other than Pride. But public perception was what it was at the time, so it was a welcome bit of cheer. Behind the scenes, the Rainbow Crosswalk had been through some trials to get approved. It faced hesitancy at nearly every stage, and at one point, they were even threatened to take legal action to have the crosswalk painted over. This was because the city had faced some backlash from members of the public and city council over the installation. So the threat to remove it was dropped after a meeting with Pride, which pointed to the months of correspondence and approved and signed paperwork calling it a permanent crosswalk installation. And they also, pointed to the virality of the Swift Current Rainbow Crosswalk in the news, how it had painted us in a positive light. That going back on that now wouldn't exactly look great. It would be quite depressing for a lot of people. So the city withdrew that threat. And while they didn't apologize, they have been mostly supportive ever since, making the annual Pride Week proclamations, raising the flag at Market Square, and hosting this talk. So I don't mention that bit of history to be discouraging. It's an example of learning and growth. It would be just not truthful if I didn't mention it. But I think it shows how progress is made in these sorts of movements. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, another step forward, and hopefully, we get over the obstacle together over time, right? The crosswalk is also threatened physically every year. There have been acts of vandalism done to try and erase it, burnouts, paint, the works. That makes its maintenance that much more important to a lot of people, to send the message that there have always been gender and sexually diverse people here, and there always will be. So, yeah, we maintain that rainbow crosswalk to this day. 2018 was a big Pride year as well, with our first 57s dedicated to Pride game, a plaid party at the Chinook Golf Course, and a bunch of other really awesome events. And then at this point throughout the year, Southwest Saskatchewan Pride had started doing educational meetings with other organizations and individuals and businesses. This was introduced to sort of follow up on the history of the educational panels, to sort of fill that gap, and continues to this day. We were invited to Herbert, for example, to speak with their town council about their Pride Week flag. So that sort of work is still being done. And it's one of the primary things that we offer to communities outside of Swift Current. Because again, we're not Swift Current Pride, we're Southwest Saskatchewan Pride. So we have a mandate to serve our neighboring communities. So if you are from a neighboring community and you would like to talk to me about having an event or some sort of education program or anything, let me know. I would love to make it happen. Yeah, and the COVID years, of course, were rough, but still showed growth. There was a socially distanced and online Pride Week of events, and this was also when the planning of the Pride Center occurred. The Pride Center was originally going to be called The Closet, spelt with a K for some reason, but received pushback from members of the gender and sexually diverse community over this name. It was critiqued for implying that people had to go back in the closet to feel safe, to have community. It was also critiqued for being spelt with a K, because why? I mention this because I want you to understand that we aren't actually a big gay hive mind. We disagree all the time. People have different priorities, different interests, different opinions constantly. It's actually really annoying, but it's human. So yeah, it's just important to remember that. Anyway, Southwest Saskatchewan Pride decided to just refer to it the way they had been before, as, the Pride Center. So in 2022, it came to be. And, and remember how I mentioned that the city has been a better ally over time? This is definitely a high point. The Pride Center opened at the Dixon Community Center, which is a city facility. And it was a fabulous space to start out in. Really sort of allowed for more growth day to day with the community. Instead of just, 1 week or 1 day a year, there was a space in Swift Current dedicated to queer people. 2022 also saw the first queer prom at Fairview School, which was an opportunity for graduates to dress how they felt comfortable and bring a same-gender escort. And it has been held in other neighboring towns since. I suspect it'll be making a comeback to Swift Current this year. But it's another sort of popular event and a good example of the ongoing involvement of students in all these things. And then the Lyric had historically been the host of just about all Pride events, but with their temporary closure in 2023, we had to look elsewhere. So they held a drag show at Walker Place and some smaller events elsewhere. 2023 was a bit of a rough year again, unfortunately. For example, a known supporter of conversion therapy was invited to speak in Swift Current. Now, conversion therapy had already been illegal for a few years at that point. So this was shocking to a lot of people that it was being allowed to occur. So this event was protested by a number of people, including some Pride board members. It was not an official Pride protest, but I mean, we were there. Additionally, a transphobic organization put on the so-called Million March for Kids, which on the surface sounds like a good march, noble even. It implies that kids need support, which they do. But unfortunately, this is an example of sort of a wolf in sheep's clothing situation, because instead of trying to drive supports for youth, like better school environments, mental health supports, extracurricular funding, or food security, this organization was concerned with erasing the existence of trans kids and eliminating sexual education in schools. So this event was unfortunately very well attended in Swift Current. Though we talked to a lot of people after the protest who, had shown up just to see what it was all about and left when they saw some of the signs people were carrying. Like, I remember one sign that said, "This is how we know who the children of God are and who the children of the devil are." And it's just like really unfair, cruel sort of behavior. So after debate over whether to attend that protest with a counter-protest, we did end up having a counter-protest, and it was small but mighty. Still, though, many of the youth who attend our programming have talked about feeling more unsafe since that event. That it was just really scary to see so many people in their community be, uninformed and misled into being hateful. And then in 2024, the Pride Center moved to its current location downtown and has enjoyed the increase in foot traffic that has brought, especially during market squares in the summer. The opening took place just before Pride Week, and it has hosted a variety of programming ever since, such as our thriving Dungeons & Dragons group. There was word that a repeat of the Million March would happen this year, so an official Southwest Saskatchewan Pride counter-protest was sort of quickly organized. Again, we didn't find out about it until it was coming up, so. But it ended up just being our own rally, as no Million Marchers showed up. So that was nice. And for every, middle finger and curse word that people hurled at us driving by, we had, 3 thumbs up, honks and cheers, and, lots of support as well. So I think that's sort of an important thing to remember too, is that a lot of the stuff is about opportunity. So when you create opportunities for people to show support, to be supportive, to learn, like events like this, it helps us create a safer community because it's creating those opportunities for people to learn and grow and sort of show their support that they already feel, right? And likewise, if you create space for hateful events like a conversion therapy talk, that's what you are going to attract, is people who don't respect Canadian law and don't respect the existence of queer people. Last month introduced the return of parent support meetings. So a couple of parents who had attended the original PFLAG meetings back in the day decided it was necessary to have a resource like that again. It may yet become a PFLAG chapter, but not currently because PFLAG received so many applications for new chapters this year that they closed intake until at least January. So that can either be looked at, negatively, that, oh my God, this need has increased nationally, and people are recognizing it, or positively, that there are many, many, many people all over the country who are working towards making our communities safer and more inclusive for everyone. So what I hope all this sort of illustrated is that, things are always getting better, but that's only because we do the work to make it happen. This sort of change is like a tide or a dance, as I said before, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We just have to keep going with it. And I'm going to talk a bit about upcoming programs, and then I'll open for some questions. So we have a community drum circle on Sundays with the fabulous Christine Siona. That one is $20 a session. It is so fun, and I can't recommend it enough. It's really great. You do not have to know how to play an instrument to attend this. It is very entry level. It is, for learning and communing with people. So that's a good one. And then we have a board games night tomorrow night at 6 o'clock at the Pride Center. And that's, we have a big collection of board games. So that's everyone sort of invited to come and play and try out the different games. And then our sort of routine programming, we have an art night Tuesdays at 6 p.m. With the fabulous Morgie. And then parent support on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. And that one, it's called parent support because it's primarily for parents, but it's for anyone who wants support for their loved ones and just needs more education, a space where they can ask questions that may be hurtful if they were asking the person that they were asking them about. So it's a really good opportunity for that sort of thing as well. And then Dungeons and Dragons, of course, Friday nights at 6 and Saturdays at 2:15. And coffee time is Saturdays from 12 to 2. And we're always interested in getting volunteers. We have a newsletter sign up over there and some stickers and a donation jar to sort of make our programming possible. You can also use the drop and go at Sarcan with the code SWSKPRIDE to donate your recycle money. And as I said before, we are actively looking for photos from past Pride events, from pre-Pride queerness in the region, and more information about the things happening outside of Swift Current, but still in Southwest Saskatchewan. Again, I hit a lot of dead ends in my research for that. So if you have any information or photos, please let me know. So, I think I'll take some questions if there are any.
Maybe I'll just jump in.
Yep.
Because I know a few people had to sneak away.
Yeah, for sure.
I welcome you all to stay if you are able and ask questions and visit. But for those of you that maybe have to get back to school or work at 1 o'clock, I just want to say thank you to Theo for sharing all the information. And I think it's very apparent from the talk that you have a great passion. You did a ton of research, either for this talk or just in general from your own passion for this. And I really appreciate it. I know I've learned a lot. And at the museum here during Archives Week, we showed a film called Unarchived, and it's available from the Canadian National Film Board. Mm-hmm. And it talks about this exact topic about the history, and like you said, there's places where you didn't even know where to look, so I'm really glad that you're establishing this history and reaching out to ask for others to help. So if anyone's interested in seeing that film, you can email the museum and I can send you a link to that too. But just a huge thank you to Theo for all the work and the organization. So before I turn it back over to Theo, I just want to also say that there's going to be no Lunch and Learn in December, but we're returning in January 2025 with a Lunch and Learn series, and we're starting with Hugh Henry. He'll be discussing the history of Lebanese and Syrian settlement in the Swift Current region. And if you could, before you leave, take a moment and check out The Wounded, which is in the temporary gallery, and it will be here till the end of the year. It's going to be replaced in the new year with a new exhibit from Ingenium called A Taste of Science. So it's very interactive and talks about how the food in your fridge might spoil, and it's really good for the whole family. And I think there's things to smell and touch and feel. It's going to be a great one. And also, we just opened a new military display that's a permanent military display. It's called Free and Fearless. So a big congratulations to William and Melissa, did a lot of work on that. So it's in our gift shop area there around the corner, so please take a moment to check that out. And I want to thank all of you so much for coming and welcome you back to come visit us anytime. And I'm going to turn it back over to Theo. And thanks to Nightjar for that awesome, was that not a wonderful lunch? Yeah, very good.
No questions? Oh, yep.
Just in terms of someone who wants to volunteer for something, what does that look like, and what are the sort of
So,
opportunities?
yeah, so we try and base our volunteer opportunities on what people want to offer. So if you have an event in mind that you have expertise in, we would love you to propose that sort of event. But also just sharing with us your skills so that we know sort of what events we would be able to ask you to help with. So if you're a bartender, knowing that you have the Serving It Right course done is great, because then we know to email you when we have an event with a bar. Yeah, I mean, it's as simple as going to the Pride Center and sitting and having a coffee for a couple hours every Saturday, and just creating that space for people to drop in and feel a bit safer and enjoy. We have so many books too. Like, it's a great place to just come in and read, and not just like queer books. We also have some excellent Nora Roberts, but yeah, so it's just a really lovely space to be in. And then what else? Yeah, and then our other events as well. I know one of the biggest things that you can do for us right now is encourage people to come to our programming. It's, snowy now. It's, hard for people to get themselves to leave the house in the evening, even for things wonderful like Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah, sort of just encouraging people that it is for them, this space. We don't create it for our board. We facilitate the existence of this space and these programs so that other people can participate and enjoy them. So yeah, like just telling everyone that they're invited to the Pride Center to attend our programming and yeah, volunteer as well.
In terms of donations, is there anything that you guys still need at the Pride Center?
Oh gosh. I know we wanted a vacuum, but other than that, Keurig cups. We go through those real fast, and canned drinks. They're just kind of the easiest for us to manage when, you don't want to make a whole pot of coffee when just one person comes for coffee time. So we go through the Keurig stuff pretty fast. and yeah, and then canned drinks, snacks, packaged goods. We also do a birthday party kit program for the community fridge, where we put together little gift bags that have everything you need to make a birthday cake. So contributing stuff for that is really appreciated. Whether that's money or 16 boxes of cake mix, all awesome. Yeah, so supporting that would be great. I know we also wanted to do a food drive sometime this winter for that as well. So yeah, keep an eye out for that as an opportunity. And if you go to our website, you can also donate through a PayPal link, if that's easier, than the giant pickle jar full of cash. Yeah, so, yeah. Mostly, right now, we need to continue having money to pay rent and utilities and stuff. Oh, we were also looking for a Wi-Fi sponsor, because currently the center doesn't have Wi-Fi, so it would just be a really cool thing to have and to offer to the public. But we can't really afford it. So yeah, so that's another option if anyone, would be interested in that. So yeah, yep.
Kind of a question.
Yeah.
I know a lot of recorded queer history is rooted in large urban centers.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you had anything to say about doing this work, the specific challenges of doing it in a more rural setting, kind of how that plays into the history keeping, but also organization.
Yeah, no, for sure. So yeah, it's I got to actually visit the Gay and Lesbian Archives in Toronto when I was delivering materials for them, and they were really excited about that because they had next to nothing from Saskatchewan in general. So it's kind of interesting that the representation of Saskatchewan pride in that archive is mostly Swift Current, but yeah, it's difficult to find people. As much as, we're a small town, everyone knows each other, I don't know everyone, and people assume that I'll know all the gay people, and I don't. I would love to, but I don't. The hive mind would be so useful, but it is not a thing. So just, yeah, giving me people's email addresses or phone numbers so that I can contact them for interviews would be fabulous. And collecting your own information as well and donating it is fabulous too. So as I say, photos from the events, even if it's just a blurry selfie at one of the Pride events, it's part of the memory building that we have, and it's part of the history. So we would like to keep it, right? Yeah, and I think maybe more to the sort of theory of your question, it is really unfortunate that so much of the work being done in rural communities doesn't make it into the history books, because so much of it is the stuff that actually changes the spirit of a culture, right? It's we can go to, one big city and, they can have a lot of really supportive people and that's fabulous, but is that gonna change the dial when they're surrounded by a bunch of small communities that are not up to date on the things that are being discussed in that city, And likewise, if the big city archives are not aware of where the rural communities are at and what is being accomplished, then that's history lost, and it's not going to help with outreach either, because you'll end up with situations like, someone bringing in materials to a rural school and it being totally shocking to these people because they had not had, say, any amount of sex ed prior, so then all of a sudden they're getting, university level, queer sex ed, and it's sincerely shocking for them. So knowing where we're at in our rural communities is also important for that education, right? I don't know if that,
It was like kind of an open end. I just wanted to hear you kind of talk about it.
yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else, or? Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me and listening and, learning. And you can talk to me afterward as well, or send an email or anything. So, thanks again.